The GT Force that we tested at Bible last year has had quite a run on the EWS circuit under Martin Mays. So the logical next step was to make a 29-inch version. GT actually gave the Force 29 more front travel and more aggressive geometry than its 27.5-inch sibling, but they limited it to an alloy build. We took it to Park City, Utah to see how all that shook out.
It's a pretty big bike.
I mean, it's big in a few ways. I mean, it's a long travel 29er, but it also has the suspension feel of a big bike.
Yeah, for sure.
In that it's kind of gushy.
So on the climbs, I mean, it's a big 29er. You don't expect it to be a rocket ship, but you expect it to be dignified. And I feel like there was an inordinate amount of bob in the suspension when you're out of the saddle. Like, you had to use the low compression like lockout lever in order to be out of the seat pedaling.
And you know, something about these kind of high-end builds, and you're spending this much money, I want to ride it open, and I want to see how that's going to perform, because you know, you're on undulating trail and you're not always going to be reaching down, and I want to make sure that you're on a bike that's really going to, like, you know, hook up when you're out of the saddle and you're really mashing on the pedals, and I didn't feel that.
Which is sort of disappointing for some pretty high-end bits on it.
What I did like about the suspension going downhill is it's really plush, really supple off the top. So when you're just kind of like motoring along on sort of like low grade downhill with little chattery stuff, it's nice. It picks it up really well and just smooths it all out.
Along the spectrum of bikes that are super supportive and lend themselves to a lot of input and a lot of bashing and playing and all that, this just happens to sit on the other end of the spectrum of something that just wants to suck up bumps and do it consistently. It just doesn't invite a lot of input. But I didn't feel like I could really thrash this bike the way that I think a enduro-oriented bike should be.
Yeah, I mean, where did that come in? Did you feel that was in the confidence you felt on the bike? Was it at high speed or low speed? I had the same feeling. I just didn't feel like I could really get to that level.
I think part of it was that not especially supportive suspension feel. Part of it was that it just didn't feel as roomy and forgiving in the cockpit as I want a potentially race-oriented bike like this to feel.
Yeah, it felt almost kind of high to me. Like, I just felt kind of on top of the bike in a way that you just don't expect on a big 29er like this. You know, you get on almost any other big 29er and you're in the bike, you're comfy, you feel like that front wheel is way out in front of you, and this just felt kind of perched up, and it was odd because it does sort of sit in its suspension quite a ways, and it is a really plush feeling bike, but somehow just the geo and the suspension just didn't quite line up for me.
Yeah, and I couldn't really put my finger on it. You look at it and it's got a great suspension package, you know, and it's got great wheel set, great tires, you know, it's got all these parts, these connection points to the trail that I would look at it and think, I'm gonna shred on this bike, and I couldn't find that magic.
And with spec, it was kind of a bummer to see G2 brakes on this. Like, you look around, universally everybody said, why on the Force 27.5 were there guide brakes? Like, this one, potentially more speed, more power input to the brakes. You should have more power output. They should have put codes on this bike. And it's kind of confusing. On the top end one, they put a trail brake on it. So that was a little rough. The Force 29 suspension made it good at floating through the chunder, but that alone wasn't enough for us to want to spend $4,700 on it. Then we looked further down the Force 29 lineup, and we found options that were a little more compelling. And as we were talking about this bike, we dug deeper into the lineup. And so this is their high-end build, around $4,700, and it's got Float X2 shocks, it's got a Grip 2 on the Fox 36. There's also one for around $27, and that does a couple things. For one thing, saves you $2,000, and it also puts a DPX2 rear shock, which they tend to have more support, and I think would speak well to what we wanted out of this bike. And it's got a Marzocchi Z1, which is a grip damper. So the peak to the lineup to me is that lower price point. In recent years, GT has made a name for itself as a high value brand, and that's how we'd recommend looking at the Force 29. The mid-range models offer durability, simplicity, and a more cohesive package than the top-end model that we tested here. And honestly, that's kind of cool. We've got the full written review and the rest of the roundtables at bikemag.com.